At the end of the last episode, I asked a question of whether or not today's game that I'll be reviewing will be any good. Well, given today's title, I'm sure many of you viewers will already be feeling cringy at the notion. But after playing this game enough times, I will say that while the game is not exactly good, it's really not that bad either, for reasons that I'll be explaining on this video. So, what say we don our shades, get our guns on, lock and loaded, and come get some. Here's my review of the infamous Duke Nukem Forever. This game is notorious for having an extremely long developmental cycle spanning almost 13 years, to where it actually became vaporware. That is until another company took on the rights, finished the game, and eventually released it in 2011 to very low review scores. I even had this game as one of 4 entrants to vote on my 100 subscribers special episode. But given that this game was the last game to not be voted on, I figured now would be the time to actually give it a spotlight, whether people like it or not. However, before we go guns a-blazing, let's say we dive into a short history of Duke, as well as a shortened version of the development cycle of Duke Nukem Forever's developmental process.
The first Duke Nukem was made in 1991 for DOS on PC by the studio Gearbox Software, starring the titular muscular bounty hunter on his mission to defeat a mad scientist named Dr. Proton bent on taking over the world. Basic plot, and the character itself is a parody of over-the-top action movie characters. In earlier versions of the game, the spelling of Duke's surname was slightly changed due to the developers being unaware that the Duke Nukem name was used for one of the villains from Captain Planet and the Planeteers, which was still on the air on that year. Only to find out that the cartoon studio didn't really trademark the name, so later versions of the game revert the spelling back. I played this game from a website that uses a DOSBox emulator, and for an action platformer, it's an okay game. It was then followed up by a sequel, also for DOS in 1993, and while not very groundbreaking, it's still okay for what it is. Nevertheless, Apogee realized that they had a mascot on their hands and are willing to use him again in the future. When first-person shooters are on the rise during the 90s, Apogee, later changing their studio name to 3D Realms, would go on to release Duke Nukem 3D in 1996, and the game became such a massive hit for the company, complete with great controls, a flexible weapon system, intense action, and they even gave Duke Nukem not only his trademark shades, but also a macho voice, done by Duke's voice actor, John St. John, who still does the character to this day. I even get to meet him in the 2021 year of Retropalooza Arlington. A very respectful man and a real honor to meet him in person. With Duke Nukem 3D's success, 3D Realms immediately capitalized on its popularity by announcing a sequel called Duke Nukem Forever, set to be released in late 1998 after the first trailer was shown on E3, and this is where the troubling production happens. 3D Realms decided to delay the game when they decided to switch engines during development. From there, another trailer will be shown in 2001, which looks impressive than before, showing many other interesting ideas in which half of them were scrapped. But that's still not enough to the executive, and that's because his goal was to make Duke Nukem Forever the first-person shooter to end all first-person shooters. A mistake that John Romero would make when his defunct studio, Ion Storm, developed Daikatana. While development for Duke Nukem Forever was still ongoing, there will be other Duke Nukem side story games that will be released on other consoles like the PlayStation 1, such as Duke Nukem Land of the Babes, or Time to Kill for example, all of them playing in third-person view, and I actually had fun playing with those games for a while. But with more constant and clueless meddling from 3D Realms executive, many members of the team were either fired or resigned, the game was considered vaporware, only to resurface years later when Gearbox Software got the rights to Duke Nukem Forever, and in 2011, the game is finally released to the public, after almost a decade and a half of production. Almost as bad and long as how it took Kingdom Hearts 3 to be produced. But now that Duke Nukem Forever is released, why was the game lambasted so hard? Why would it garner so much hatred? Almost every reviewer I see on the internet really went against this game with an iron fist, with the exception of one reviewer, as far as I know, named Michael Mazikane, sorry if I butchered the name, who goes by his YouTube handle, The Retro Replay, yeah, one whole word there, who gave it a fair rating and said that he still finds some enjoyment for what it is despite the overall quality. On a sidebar, The Retro Replay is one YouTuber that I follow due to his informative take on the games he reviews and gaming news he explains, which is more than I could say for most channels today who are just there for clickbait, except for Young Yeah and Spawnwave. Those guys are cool, professional, and above all, honest. However, in his review of Duke Nukem 3D, he was playing the PC version of the game, but the one I'm playing is the console version. So before we dig into the presentation of the game, let's look at the plot. The game starts from where Duke Nukem 3D left off, with Duke battling against the Cyclord champion from 3D's final level, complete with Duke kicking the Cyclord's eye for a field goal. It then transitions to a room in his tower in Nevada, where he was just playing Duke 3D while also hanging out with his ladies, the twins, which their parody is very obvious, and the game takes place 12 years after the aliens retreated at the end of Duke 3D. Duke was about to get into an interview with a Jay Leno wannabe when the aliens from the last game decided to invade Earth again and abduct many of the planet's women for their alien breeding program. Upon entering his secret Duke cave, he got into contact with both the President and Duke's superior, General Graves, with the former telling Duke not to get involved in the peace relations between him and the Cycloid Emperor, with both Duke and Graves feeling uneasy about the President's idea. After defeating a squad of aliens in Duke's casino, he learned from Graves that more aliens are coming by even massive numbers as a result of the aliens using the Hoover Dam as a power source to straighten the wormhole for an easy invasion. Duke would eventually destroy the dam, and upon seeing the President, it's been revealed that the President's plan was to have the aliens destroy Duke so that he would maintain credibility to the public, unaware of the fact that the Cycloid Emperor was going to sell the former President out anyway by being crushed to death. After destroying the Emperor, Graves rescues Duke as the former President already sent a nuke to destroy the area. The escape went haywire when it was believed that Duke Nukem was killed in a blast, with Duke himself breaking the fourth wall.
What kind of shit ending is that? I ain't dead. I'm coming back for more.
The last scene shows Duke telling the people that he's running for president himself, but is this really the end of the game? I mean, it doesn't explain how his survival was possible. That's when the DLC story, The Doctor Who Cloned Me, comes in with more exposition to the plot. The story continues after the final battle, when Duke was hanging onto Graves' hand for dear life. It's then revealed that the blast had separated both Duke from the Earth Defense Force and wakes up in a lab, about to be murdered by a Terminator 800 knockoff, a concept that was taken from the 2001 E3 trailer and are enemies for the DLC story. It's revealed that Dr. Proton, the antagonist from Duke's very first game, has survived and is the one who salvaged Duke from the Hoover Dam's destruction, and that the Duke from the primary ending of the game is actually one of Proton's Duke clones that he mass-produced, in order to make the people believe that the clones will be hailed as heroes, only to attempt to double-cross the world later. But eventually, Duke put a stop to the plan as soon as he was able to rendezvous with Graves and the EDF. Graves tells Duke that the remaining women that were abducted in the game are kept in prison on the moon by the alien Empress. So Duke sets out to the moon, destroys the Empress, and teleports the hostages back to Earth, ending Duke Nukem Forever. A cheesy story, but then again, this is Duke Nukem's world. Nothing is meant to make any sense, as it's just Duke getting the women, having men look up to him as an icon, and saving the world, taking out one alien at a time. Though admittedly, the way Duke does so in this game is very convoluted. We go from his penthouse, alternating between him being shrunk and restored, taking on various bosses from Vegas to the Hoover Dam to Area 51 and even the moon. There's no cohesion, but given that the Duke Nukem series is supposed to be parodies of action B-movies, I'll take it as it is. Much like how Deadpool's world in his game is very self-aware. There's really not much into the sound department, as you'll spend most of the time blasting enemies in your way to the end of each stage, and there's only about a few music pieces, with probably my favorite one being the Forever version of the Duke Nukem 3D theme music. The voice acting of the game, as any player of the series would expect, is very over the top, whether it be from Duke himself,
Power on. Now it's time to kick some ass. Size only matters when you're full grown, baby. Advance team my ass.
or NPCs like Captain Dillon of the EDF.
I just got back from helping my friend find his wife. Christ, what a fucking pussy.
Some of the dialogue being said in the game, especially some of the one-liners, don't really fly nowadays with today's society, especially when many of the jokes are dated. But if you're someone from the 90s or have played Duke Nukem games during those years, you might actually get a chuckle or two. There are some moments in the game that I will say would have people be upset about, and understandably so. In this case, the Hive level, where many of the female captives you see, you'll be forced to mercy kill them, which in itself is in poor taste, despite being an obvious reference to the Alien franchise. Graphics-wise, it's okay if it were still the 6th generation console era. Basically, instead of making the game from scratch, Gearbox just took what source code they can gather and just update the graphics themselves. And it's hard to overlook some of the hue and shading in some stages, particularly some stage elements that are mandatory for proceeding with the game. That's not to say all stages have bad graphics, mind you. Rather, some are mostly average. Some stages are rendered dark on purpose, prompting you to use the Duke vision to see in dark areas, and I will say that these swimming stages suck. Nuff said there. And then there's the gameplay itself, which many players also criticize. You see, during the development of the game, the executives at 3D Realms wanted to make an FPS that goes beyond the genre by adding some questionable gimmicks to add some flavor to the game, and when Gearbox Software took over, they went along with the idea to mix results. Rather than having an HP count like the last game, Duke instead has an Eagle meter, which allows him to take some number of hits as the gauge will allow, and will auto-recover over time. Some gimmicks added to the game would be the various things Duke can interact with, whether it be playing basketball, score high on a pinball machine, looking at risque material, or admiring yourself in front of a mirror. These will help increase your ego meter to help you last longer. Other gimmicks include driving sections, which I'm certain it was added in because of Halo, and while I think it's not necessary to have it all in this game, the controls are not as bad as everyone thinks. They can go on the stiff side sometimes, but it's really not too bad. And hey, I get a kick out of mowing down aliens with this monster truck, the Mighty Foot. The shooting gameplay is what you'd expect. You see an enemy, take them out, take their weapons, lather, rinse, and repeat. However, unlike Duke 3D, or even Doom for that matter, you only have a 2-weapon carrying limit, meaning some weapons you have to ditch them, and other weapons that are mostly situational at best like RPGs, they're only essential for boss battles and nothing else. From what I hear from YouTuber DL Jado on his review of Duke Nukem Forever, he said that the reason Gearbox went with this weapon limit idea is because, quote, they don't want to make things confusing for the player who starts playing an FPS, end quote. That mentality is very stupid, so much so that a similar mentality was done by a certain icon turned convict when said person did Balan Wonderworld. Strangely enough, the PC version gets one good treatment by actually having an option for a 4-weapon carrying limit, whereas the console versions don't have that, and one of the achievements in the game is that once you have Duke's golden pistol from the Duke Cave, you have to go through the whole game while still having the gun in your inventory, which I actually did. More on that later. People complain on how much enemies tend to gang up on Duke ever so often, but to that I say, good, that's how it's supposed to be in any FPS. You have to use your own instincts on getting behind cover to avoid damage and utilize your weapons more efficiently. In addition, these aliens want revenge on Duke after their defeat from the 3rd game, and they'll do whatever it takes to charge at him until they see him dead. That's what enemies are supposed to do. You have an assortment of weapons ranging from pistols, machine guns, shotguns, RPGs, and alien lasers that you can steal from enemies, but there are also some unconventional ones like the Devastator, which is like a machine gun with rockets, a Shrink Ray, which is self-explanatory, the Freeze Ray with regenerating ammo, or the Hollow Duke, which renders Duke invisible while enemies attack the fake Duke. There are also items like steroids and beer, which temporarily increase both melee attacks and defense respectively, but I don't use them often, as you're better picking off enemies from a distance with your guns. In some stages, you won't run out of ammo easily, as you can always run to the nearest EDF box for more ammo as needed. Some stages, however, you won't be so lucky for ammo, so you gotta be good at aiming your weapons and conserve as much ammo as you can, since some enemies are quite tough and resilient, regardless of the difficulty setting. Whether it be pig cops that are either cheap with long-distance attacks or launch at you for big damage, teleporting aliens that like to ambush you, or these no-good Octobrains whose spark blasts have a big damage radius and can deflect explosive ammo back at you, and they're more irritating in the boss match against the Octo King. Also, I'm not a fan of the turret sections as there's no means to take cover from enemy fire, and your gun overheats way too fast, with the Mothership Battle being the only section that I like, it because it's satisfying to destroy the ship itself. So after almost a decade and a half, was it worth the wait? I would say, not really. As mentioned, Gearbox Software should have instead made an entirely new game, instead of just recycling the scraps and have it come out as half-baked. But to their credit, as half-baked as the game is, at least the development of the game is done at last. The charm of Duke Nukem himself may be present in this game, but that alone is not enough to make up for the average graphics, questionable gameplay design, unnecessary gimmicks, and lukewarm presentation. But from my experience of the game, I did manage to find some fun in the campaign. I'll give it at least a fair 6, and while it sounds like I'm being slightly sympathetic, I have some reasons for it. We can all agree that Duke Nukem Forever is obviously not a good shooter, as there are some better shooters in the market. Heck, I even find Duke 3D or even old school Doom to be better FPS games even today and worth replaying, especially when neither of those games don't have to put up with any weapon carrying limitations, and their replay value is very high. As far as Duke Nukem Forever is concerned, I don't consider it a bad FPS either. I actually played through the whole game and the DLC, knowing what I'll be getting myself into, and whenever I fail, I kept on experimenting until I get it right. In fact, that's what you do in any game, good or bad. Trial and error, so to speak. I do get a few good laughs on some of the humor, and in my opinion, replay value for the game is actually quite mid. And the reason why is because while the endings are lackluster at best, the payoff in the end is really good, as you'll be rewarded with cheat codes. Something you don't see in FPS games these days, and you're given options such as raising head sizes of enemies for better headshots, or giving yourself infinite health, infinite ammo, or one-hit kills. So you can have revenge on all the stages that have been giving you a hard time and laugh about it. Granted, 3 of the cheats will prevent you from getting some achievements in the game, but thanks to the internet, there's an exploit that I took advantage of, and I actually went out of my way to get all the achievements in the game. That's how insane I was, folks.
The game overall is average at best, but it's worth trying at least once, especially post-game with all the cheat codes turned on. I actually bought this game on the PlayStation 3's PlayStation Store for just only $5, along with the DLC, which is also $5. And some people will think that I just wasted $10 there, but honestly, after playing through this game, it's not exactly a total loss. And for those that are curious about the 360 version, well, one thing I can tell you is that it is backwards compatible with both the Xbox One and Series consoles. Well, now that this review is out of the way, it's time to venture forward to some new games and series for me to review. Because up next in the Chronicles, I'll be conducting my next retrospective video featuring a very infamous war of historical proportions. I will not reveal it just yet until I upload the video. With that said, if you haven't done so already, feel free to subscribe to my channel at any time, ring the bell for any new upcoming videos from me, and don't forget to follow me on social media. Your support will be greatly appreciated. Until then, this has been Musashi X, and I bid you all farewell, take care, and stay tuned!